A happy family lives in a beautiful house near a forest in Denmark. Peter was a doctor, Anne a lawyer, and their 2 daughters Fanny and Frida. One day, when they were ready for their routine, Peter complained about Anne's decision to let her client visit their house. He told Anna that things like that shouldn't get used to. Hi. Before we continue the story, make sure you have pressed the subscribe button. Thank you. After everyone left, Anna discussed with Cecilia about the case she was facing. Cecilia revealed that last night she had drunk 3 glasses of alcohol, and in the last 1 year she had dated less than 10 men, and she had made love with 7 of them. With Cecilia's confession, Anne was sure that she would give good testimony in court later. That night before her 2 daughters went to bed, Anne read them a fairy tale about a girl named Alice who fell down a rabbit hole. But whether the hole was too deep or she was falling too slowly, Alice had time to look around and wonder what would happen next in the process. After the fairy tale was finished, Fanny asked permission to stay up late with Anne to welcome her half-brother who was coming from Sweden. He is Gustav, Peter's son, with his ex-wife Rebecca. Fanny asked why Gustav didn't live with them, and Anne responded that it was impossible for someone to live in 2 countries simultaneously, and then she asked Fanny to sleep. A few hours later, Peter arrived with Gustav and Anne immediately welcomed the young man well. The next morning when the family was having breakfast, Gustav received a welcoming gift from his 2 younger half-sisters. Fanny gave him a keychain while Frida gave him a picture of love. Gustav is still awkward but relaxed, and today Peter plans to take him shopping for his bedroom needs. After that, Anne met her younger sister, Lena, and told her that Gustav had been expelled from school, and Rebecca wanted to send him to a boarding school in Denmark. Anne admitted that she was actually not happy with Gustav's presence at her house. However, these feelings were buried after seeing the increasingly close relationship between father and son. Then Lena told Anne the good news about their mother and told her to meet her. But Anne just remained silent and didn't say anything. Anne went home and she found Gustav's keychain on the front porch and put it in her bag. She then immediately cleaned up the messy things in the living room, including Gustav's room. Gustav suddenly appeared wearing only a towel. Anne immediately explained that she was just cleaning up there because she thought Gustav wasn't at home. That evening, Cecilia met Anne to express her concerns about the upcoming trial. She was afraid that they wouldn't believe her testimony, and then she would only be embarrassed afterwards. Anne explained that the perpetrator might be released, but the most important thing was that she had done the right thing for the girls there. After picking up her 2 daughters from the equestrian, Anne heard a dispute between Gustav and Peter about Gustav's move to Denmark. It turns out that Gustav doesn't like living here because he feels restricted. However, Peter and Rebecca have agreed to move to Denmark for a change in attitude, and Anne cannot help them in this situation. Peter then shares this problem with Anne, revealing that the decision to bring Gustav to live in their house was wrong. He thought that Gustav's stubbornness was the result of the freedom his mother had given him. And now when Gustav fails, Rebecca runs away from responsibility and hands Gustav over to him. Hearing that, Anne immediately reminded him that whatever the situation, Gustav was his son, who he had to guide. After losing the trial, Cecilia ran out of court and was immediately stopped by Anne. Anne tries to calm her down by praising her testimony, but that isn't enough to cover Cecilia's disappointment that the perpetrator was actually acquitted. After that, Anne went home and found out that someone had committed a robbery at her house. She then informed Peter about this and asked Gustav, who had just come, to check his room. As soon as Anne was about to wash clothes, she found the keychain that she had previously found on the front porch, but was now in Gustav's jeans pocket. And with this clue, she was sure that Gustav was the perpetrator of the robbery. The next day, Anne returned the keychain to Gustav and asked him to confess to the robbery he had committed. But Gustav just acted confused, trying to give the impression that he wasn't the culprit. Anne asked Gustav to speak to Peter and provide an explanation to the police who were currently investigating this case. But Gustav continues to deny the accusations no matter where the case takes him. Anne then tried to understand Gustav's situation as a wayward young man who was facing difficult times. Because of that, she offered a deal, namely that they would both keep their mouths shut about this case on the condition that Gustav had to start behaving well and mingling with her family, and he agreed. When the family invites Lena and her son Lucas to their barbecue, Gustav seems to start opening up and getting along with the children. That evening, Gustav came home with a woman his age, interrupting Anne, who was working. He then introduced Amanda to Anne and they chatted for a while. Gustav took Amanda to his room and made love to her until their voices disturbed Anne's focus, who was working. Remembering the behavior of the 2 young people made Anne miss her husband. Gustav has completely reconciled with Anne, and their closeness begins to show when they swim in the lake. And that night when they were chatting together at the bar, Anne kissed Gustav on the lips because she felt she could talk more openly to him. After that night, Anne began to feel different when she was with Gustav. Her feelings now are no longer the same as a parent's love for their child, until one moment, This feeling began to disturb Anne's peace until she couldn't sleep because of anxiety. As if she had forgotten the title she had, she was guided by her desire to Gustav's room and then voluntarily blew it up with him because it turned out that Gustav couldn't refuse her. They had this relationship for several months, and they continued the affair behind Peter's back. One day when the family was celebrating their 2 daughters' birthdays, Lena caught Gustav and Anne making out behind the house. Of course, this made her very disappointed with Anne considering that Gustav was still too young, but fortunately, she didn't tell Peter about this. Feeling ashamed and guilty, Anne finally ended her relationship with Gustav. That evening after Peter returned from the cabin, he told Anne that Gustav had decided to go to boarding school. In fact, Peter really regretted Gustav's decision because he had to be separated from his son again. However, it turned out that he made this decision after he told Peter about Anne's affair with him. When Peter asked Anne to admit it, she denied it and thought Gustav was just looking for attention. Then Anne packed her clothes and intended to leave her own house. She claimed that she had treated Gustav very well, but now she had to accept bullshit in return. She asks Peter to choose, Gustav the boy he doesn't know, or her who gave birth to his child. However, Peter doesn't know who to choose because he feels like he can't trust anyone right now. Anne tries to convince Peter by telling him that the person who robbed their house was Gustav, but she kept quiet about it because she cared about Gustav and gave him a chance to change into a better boy. After hearing all of Anne's explanations, Peter finally forgot about Gustav's accusations and made up with Anne. The next day, Peter and Anne invited Gustav to discuss his accusations against Anne again. Peter tries to understand Gustav's situation by admitting that he isn't a good father because he hasn't been there since Gustav was little, so he understands that Gustav feels angry because of his lack of attention. However, Peter mentioned it wasn't Anne's fault that he and Rebecca divorced because bad things happened, and it caused them to feel like they were no longer suitable for each other. Gustav asks, "What does all this mean?" Peter again explained that his accusations against Anne were a serious matter, and he thought that Gustav had lied to them. Hearing that, Gustav was helpless and didn't know what else to say, and unfortunately, he had no proof that he had said the truth. Anne tried to comfort him, but Gustav spat in Anne's face and then left them. After making the decision to move to a boarding school, Gustav packed his things and received a goodbye from his 2 younger half-sisters. After that, Peter immediately took him there. Several days passed after Gustav left. Peter and Anne seemed to have regained peace in the house, as if Gustav was the source of the problems when he was there. Meanwhile, Gustav, who didn't accept being placed in the wrong position, met Anne in her office to ask her to admit their mistake to Peter. He emphasized that what they were doing was an illegal relationship, and that as a lawyer, Anne should know better about that. Unfortunately, Anne refused his request, taking advantage of the lack of evidence of their actions. Once again, Anne gave him a chance, namely to shut up and live a normal life or stay away from her life, and Gustav immediately cried when he heard that. Several days passed and now it was Christmas, where the parents gave Fanny and Frida a dog, and they looked very happy. When it was bedtime, Gustav came back to the house intending to meet Peter, but Anne stopped him. Gustav was adamant that he wanted Peter to know the truth, but Anne told him that Peter couldn't stand facing him anymore. Anne asks him to leave and then she returns home, leaving a distraught Gustav. A few months later, Peter got a call from the Stockholm police asking him to come. After he returns home, he looks sad and tells Anne that a hunter found Gustav's body deep in the forest. Peter guessed that Gustav intended to go to the cabin where he and Gustav had camped before because he was almost there. However, because he was tired, he decided to rest at that location. Meanwhile, according to the police, Gustav had been lying there for several months, then snow fell, and he died of cold. Some of them believed that Gustav gave up on his journey and decided to stop. Knowing this, Anne felt sad and cried in the bathroom, remembering her evil deeds. In the final scene, the family is dressed neatly and drives in the car, leaving the mystery behind.